Hello, I'm Steve Slocombe, Senior Judge in the Antique Motorcycle Club of America and Mark Specialist on the 1930-36 Harley-Davidson Big Twin. I'm going to explain the basics of the AMCA judging system and then run a demonstration for you on this 1936 VLH Harley owned by Peter Reeves. This bike is already in the AMCA Winner's Circle, so I'm not expecting to find too much, but hope you'll learn the rudiments of the judging system and appreciate the kind of work that club owners put in to getting these bikes showroom correct. A few words about the AMCA judging system. We only have two categories, unrestored and restored. In each case, we try to get them as they were in the showroom when they were built. The Harleys are well documented. There are many visible parts and plenty of people trying to get them just right. Let's check the identity of the bike by looking at the engine numbers, which is all you've got on Harley-Davidsons until 1969. This is a cracking set of engine numbers. They're in the right font. You can see the boss hasn't been altered when the engine numbers have been planed down. Yep, these are just right. Now we'll work through this bike systematically in the 25 categories. The judges have about 25 minutes to do this, and we're not supposed to touch the bikes while we judge. First we take a general look, and we can see this is 1936 Harley-Davidson Big Twin flathead. It's the first full year for the 80 cubic inch or 1300cc bike. It's in teak red and black with the gold striping. The first year for the flying ball decal and the horseshoe-shaped tank motif. It's stuffed with one-year parts, such as the cylinders, the fork shield, the horn mounts, the oiler cover, and the rear stand. It looks pretty straight, so it's time to get started. Category 1 is the frame, so let's make sure we aren't wasting our time, because incorrect engine frame combination is a disqualification. Let's look at the features of the VL frame. This tab under the tanks that carries the control bracket was introduced in 1932. This sidecar lug was altered from straight cut to countersunk probably around the beginning of 1933. The toolbox was moved from the front forks to the rear right-hand side in 1935, needing this bracket to mount it. And finally, this lug to carry the four-pipe exhaust from 1929 was finally removed at the back end of the 1934 season at around engine number 6500. Now for the front forks. These are 1 year only for the 1936 VL because they had to reverse the grease connections on the main fork and put a tab on the spring fork for this 1 year only fork shield. It's the first year for these chromed dome nuts holding down the front forks. We have a standard accessory package in 1936, including this ride control, in its correct finishes of black enamel, cadmium and stainless steel. The VL rockers carry the same part number as the post-1941 rockers, but without the elevated bosses for the grease connections. Now we're looking at category 3, the front fender. This bike is fitted with the front fender accessory lamp, introduced in 1935. Note that it has the narrow pre-1947 fender straps. Now we're looking at the mud flap, which is laminated rubber and not an accessory. It's held in with 3 round head screws, not the Philister screws called for in the parts book. Above them we can see these 2 Philister screws, which are the blanking screws for the front stand catch, fitted even when the front stand is not. Now we're looking at the rear fender, category 4. There's no cracking at the hinged area because the whole mudguard was painted at the factory and the wheel was then mounted from underneath. This also meant that these mudguard closing bolts are painted. Notice that the fender's mounted with these luggage carrier bolts with the nuts on the outside and showing some exposed thread when the luggage carrier is not used. There are also 3 holes filled in on the top of the fender for the tang on the front of the luggage carrier. Now we're looking at the front wheel. This is an 18-inch rim. These were an option after 1934. Previously they were all 19-inch. We've got the 18x450 tyre. Again, the 18x400 was an option. These are the Harley rims bought in from Kelsey Hayes' wheel with the distinctive 45-degree angle on the sides. As a one-year only feature, the rims are painted. On the black and red paint scheme they're painted red. On the other paint schemes they take the first name colour. You can see how impractical this was with 6 colour schemes and 2 wheel rim sizes. So this is a one-year only feature for 1936. The spokes are cadmium, although the club will accept glass beaded stainless steel as a substitute. If they're not glass beaded, it's a quarter-point deduction. The wheel is fitted with the Schrader valve cheaters, which simulate the look of the early style valves. If they're missing, it's another quarter-point deduction. The hub fittings are cadmium, and the axle and space are parkerized, and we have the little washer under the grease fitting on the hub. No deductions here. Now we're looking at the rear wheel. It's interchangeable wheels on the VL, and there are no faults on this one. The things to note are the 1932 and up style axle in parkerized finish, and the axle adjusters different lengths. On the sidecar side, you have a longer adjuster with a spacer collar underneath. Next comes the handlebars. These are the stock VL bars. They've got the shorter grips that came out in 1935, with the deeply impractical white rubbers that look so good. Black was a no-cost option. We've got chrome spirals with the dip and horn buttons held on with round head screws, not the Philister ones called for in the parts book. On the handbrake lever we have the cast bracket, not the later stamped one. The special screw is at the bottom. The star washer is under the pivot screw, and the small screw is there to hold in the cable nipple. The finishes are all correct, no deductions. Now we're looking at the engine. It's a stroker engine for 1936 because Harley added an extra 1/8 inch each way by moving the crank pin towards the edge of the flywheels, taking it up from 74 to 80 cubic inches. So we see stroker plates underneath the cylinders, and this means shorter nuts to hold the cylinders down to the base. They're one-year only cylinders for 1936 with 3 fins near the manifold, and these are in pretty good condition. There are no reproductions available, so I let a little bit of corrosion go if there are no broken fins. The valve covers are cadmium, as is the one-year oiler cover with the underside cut away. It's the first year for the new bigger washers under the cylinder head bolts, and first year for the 9-bolt heads, replacing the earlier 7-bolt ones. I don't see any faults. Next is the gearbox. The kicker arm is cranked out about an extra inch for 1935 and 36, with no change in part number, to clear the new rear toolbox. This kicker pedal has all the right finishes. The gearbox is mostly silver, but note the parkerized nuts, and the 4-speed stamp, because this bike is fitted with the rare 1936 optional 4-speed transmission, which was Harley's first constant mesh 4-speed on the Big Twin. On the left-hand side of the bike, we can see the early style shifter ball, not the 1941 and up one with the waist on it and the same part number. There is a one-year only dished shifter lever for 1936, and you can see the tubular shifter rod used on the reverse and 4-speed transmissions, which take the reverse shifter tower. We move on to the carburetor, air intake and manifold. This is the first year for the 1936 to 39 swoopy 2-piece air intake. The carburetor is a Linkert M41L, essentially 1 year, 1 model only for the 36 VLH. The finish is flat nickel. On the right hand side of the bike we can see the inlet manifold. This is the VL one in cadmium, which has the casting number underneath 503-33. These slotted parkerized manifold screws probably came out in the middle of 1935, having previously been plain and cadmium plated. Now we're looking at the exhaust system. The finish is black enamel, and we can see the front clamp complete with its spacer, the centre clamp introduced in 1932, the rear muffler with its 1935-36 fishtail, the rear clamp correctly mounted with its reinforcing and with the nuts on the outside. No deductions. Let's move on to the headlamp and wiring. The wiring is the correct 6-volt cloth-covered cable, which is available as a good quality repro. The headlight is a cycle ray, introduced in 1935, and this is the early style with no ground terminal and with the cadmium-plated rivets. On the tail light, we can see the faired-in style with the chrome cup, introduced in 1934, and the domed red glass introduced in 1935. No deductions. On oil tank and oil lines, you can see the large tank caps used for 1935 and 36 and chrome plated. The oil lines are flat nickel plated and still with the unstepped nuts. This is the gas filter introduced in 1932. Here you can see the thicker oil pump end cap introduced in mid-1935 and the dust cap for the oiler cover, which is often missing. On the footboards, we're still using the rectangular ones, and these are the correct mats with the dash after Harley and the 14 rivets put in correctly. The hinge bolts are correctly mounted with the nuts on the inside. No deductions. Now we're looking at the chain guards. The front chain guard is in the correct black enamel finish with the chrome covers announced for the 1934 season. It's actually 1 year only for 1936 because of the one-piece inner chain guard held in with a screw at the top. Note also the parkerized bracket at the front of the rear chain guard, in contrast with the rear bracket which was painted with the Fender. The bolt is correctly fitted with the nut on the outside. No deductions. Now we examine the seat and seat post. The seat post is cadmium plated, and the seat is the full pan version introduced in 1934, but without the drain holes from 1940. There are 6 small spacers at the back to adjust it, because it took Harley until 1938 to work out you can have the same effect from 2 thick and 2 thin spacers. Here's a nice original brake pedal with its distinctive tang to engage in the sidecar brake lock when fitted. The brake rods are correctly installed, and this bike has the optional stoplight switch. On the front brake cable, we start with the cadmium or nickel plated ferrule, see the fabric covered cable and the black painted handlebar clip with its lock washer underneath. Here's the 1932-38 cable oiler, and then the W-shaped clamp holding the cable to the forks. Lower down the brake cable, we have another cable clip under the brake anchor bolt, fitted with a castle nut and a clevis pin, another ferrule, then the adjuster, a special ferrule with a felt washer to stop water getting into the cable, and finally it's terminated under the special clamp attached to the brake operating lever. This is the 1935-36 front brake with the adjustable brake shoe pivot stud. The clutch pedal is 1 year only for 1936, with its 1 year rod. It's kicked out to make room for the longer police generator, not fitted on this machine. The back brake is also the 1935-36 style, with the adjustable brake shoe pivot stud. The operating lever is correct, the clevis pin and washer are correctly installed, and the sprocket is correctly parkerized. No deductions. The side stand, or jiffy stand, is an option, but it's hard to believe any solo bike left the showroom without one. This is in the parkerized finish, with a painted spring, like the clutch pedal, and there are no flats or wear marks underneath. The tubular rear stand is 1 year only on the 1936 VL, as is the stand catch and the smaller springs fitted on the pivot bolts. No deductions. Now we're looking at the instrument panel. It has the white-faced ammeter, introduced probably in mid-1934, but not announced as a new feature until 1936. There's no spacer under the ammeter, and I don't deduct either way. Note that the dash panel has the round-headed screws on the side. That's another mistake in the parts book. These are the late-style chromed dash handles with no checkering. On the speedometer, we can see that it's mounted underneath with the correct dome-headed bolts. Looking at the dial, we can see that this nice internally lit 100-mile-an-hour Corbin has the maximum speed hand, but that's probably an Indian needle, so we'll take off a quarter point for that. Here's the 6-volt generator, the Harley Model 32E, with the black cap on the end and no lock washers under the screws. At the other end, it's held in with hex bolts without slots in. It has the black enamel strap holding it down, this having been cadmium until about 1934. It has the nickel-plated brass tag. This is all correct. The horn has the bar and shield face for the first time in 1936, with 1 year only chrome horn brackets and these chrome or nickel bolts. The little plates on the front of the mounting kit are chromed as a 1 year feature, and note the round-headed cadmium screws for mounting. No deductions. On the spark plugs, note the cotton-covered leads with the little hooks on the end, and the owner is showing off here by using some original 1 3/8 AF Harley spark plugs. Fabulous. On the battery box, we can see the cheaters that simulate the look of the terminals on the original battery. This toolbox is used only in 1935 and 1936 on the VL. It's in the correct black enamel finish with the patent decal. No deductions. The fuel tank is in good condition. The gas taps and gas line are flat nickel plated. No deductions. We have a category called nuts, bolts and mounting hardware, which we've covered as we go along. No deductions. On plating and brightwork, you'll notice the sparing use of chrome on the VLs, although they do have quite a bit of cadmium. We found nothing we could deduct points for. For paintwork, this bike is beautifully finished in the 1936 paint scheme of teak red and black with gold striping, and the correct decals. No deductions. So, in summary, we spent quite a while looking at Pete Reeves's 1936 Harley VLH, and we found a quarter point deduction for an incorrect Speedo needle. This bike really does deserve its place in the winner's circle. See you at the meet. Goodbye.